Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley and I'll be your host today. Joining me for this episode is Lorraine Benjamin, who is one of the School of Stitched Textiles graduate Master Practitioner students. Just to give you a little bit of background before we start our chat, Lorraine has been creating with fibre since she was a young girl. As a child, she'd while away the hours sewing, crocheting and working with crewel work. She learned to sew garments at the side of her mother and paternal grandmother, who were both gifted seamstresses. She is a self-taught artist who began quilting in 1997 and was immediately intrigued with the design elements of a quilt. Thus began her exploration of colour, repetition, design and texture. Soon Lorraine began to experiment with a more contemporary approach to textiles and developed her own artistic voice. Her creative roots are firmly embedded in the traditional needle arts, and this is reflected in her current body of work. Inspired by her faith, her travels and the natural world, she employs layers of both hand and machine stitch together with various surface design techniques. This unique approach allows her to successfully capture the depth, colour, contrast and texture of her subject matter. Since 1993, Lorraine had lived in the Ithaca area of Finger Lakes region in central New York, until 2019 when she relocated to the Villages in Florida. She recently retired from a career in nursing. She enjoys the support of her husband, their children and grandchildren. Lorraine is an exhibiting textile artist and has won several awards for her fibre art. She owns and operates the Tangle Thread, which is a long-arm quilting business, and gives presentations and teaches classes focused on mixed media and stitched art. These days she dedicates her energy to facilitating a group of 25 local artists who meet twice a month to share and explore their common love for textile art. Lorraine also enjoys writing poetry and painting with acrylics and watercolour. So Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Textile Talk. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Gail, for inviting me.
No, it is. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you. Obviously, I say here, but you're quite a little way away, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm across the pond, as they say.
And your weather is much better, I gather, than ours is at the moment. So I'm feeling a little bit jealous right now.
Yes, I live in Central Florida, and right now we are having a bit of a cool spell. So it's in the 50s today, but it should be a high of close to 60 or 70 by.
Mm. It's windy, rainy, and miserable here in the UK, which is pretty much business as normal, really, to be honest. Okay, so I wonder if the first thing that I could do is ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you came to decide on a Master Practitioner course with us.
Yes. I have been a fiber enthusiast for many years. I grew up doing all kinds of things with fibers, from crueling, crocheting, and cross stitch to sewing. My mother was a gifted seamstress as well as my grandmother. And when I was raising my kids, I didn't do a lot of anything creative. But in 1997, as my children began to be in high school and graduate from high school, I began to explore quilting as a hobby. Well, that immediately intrigued me with all types of exploration into color and texture and repetition. So that sort of began it for me. Several years after I started to quilt, maybe 5 years or so, I began a more contemporary approach to it, and I started incorporating some of my needle art techniques that I had done as a child, more embroidery and crueling and that sort of thing. I did develop my own artistic voice over a period of years, and I do mostly wall art now. I do some kind of a contemporary approach to embroidery stitching with some felting involved with it, some quilting, applique, layers. What inspired me to partake of the School of Stitched Textile embroidery course was I saw myself going in this direction, and I felt like I was excelling in this kind of contemporary approach to embroidery. I was certainly not using any patterns. I was expressing my own voice, and I just wanted everything I could have on the subject. I wanted to explore it further. So when I read the syllabus for the master class on embroidery through your school, I decided this was something I wanted to try. I knew it would push me. I knew it would open up new avenues for me. It would cause me to think in different ways about my art, and I don't regret it. It's one of the best things I've ever done.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you. So I wonder, I mean, I remember particularly looking back at some of the work that you created while you were on the course, that you loved making sketchbooks and also using them as part of your design process. I wonder if you could talk us through the process and how you used the designs that you created in them.
I actually dabbled in sketchbooks before I participated in the master class with School of Stitched Textiles. I took a course with Dion Swift on sketchbooks, and that really got me kind of playing around a little bit more with sketchbooks as a kind of a jumping off point for my creative endeavors. I use sketchbooks as more of a mind map. And as I said, a jumping off point. I use them to ask the questions, what if I, cut out a hole here and added something from behind it? What would that do? Or what if I added some machine or hand stitching here? What if I changed the color? I'll collage, I'll paint, I'll add ink, I'll do a lot of writing, poetry, I'll respond to music or a particular color. Basically, I explore a theme, whatever theme I've chosen, and intuitively. I said it's a jumping off point. And then I can just sit back and look at everything that I've compiled in my sketchbook. And from there, I can be inspired to go in a particular direction. I used sketchbooks. Well, I wouldn't say exhaustively, but, I use them a lot during the masterclass
Mm.
approach, mainly because I wanted to have a tracking device for everything that I did. I wanted to be able to go back and remember what was my process here.
And of course, I always think, I don't know if you'd agree, but I always think that there are two types of sketchbook. There are the kinds of sketchbooks that look absolutely gorgeous and that you tend to see in magazines or, as part of a book. And there are the ones that actually function
Right.
as an aid to memory and ideas. And they do tend to look very different, don't they?
Yes, they do. And my sketchbooks are not works of art. My sketchbooks are very functional. They are a place where I can experiment. They are not meant to look pretty. Although, occasionally I might have a page that I'm really drawn to and, we'll develop a piece of art based on that. But that's rare. It's more of experimentation and asking those what if questions.
I think you're being very modest there. I remember that you had some absolutely gorgeous looking pages in your sketchbooks, but I can certainly see that they were intended that they were very much evolving as you were thinking about the project. They weren't something that you were perhaps constructing afterwards because they looked pretty or they looked attractive or they would make a good photograph. It was very much that you were thinking about what you were doing, and this was serving as a notebook and a way of evolving designs.
Yes, yes.
I don't know if you'd agree, but I think that particularly new students, when they come in, they look at some of those really beautiful sketchbooks and they feel completely intimidated that they just simply couldn't come up with anything that gorgeous. So it's almost as though it turns them off sketchbooks in their entirety. And I think that's a shame,
Yes.
really.
Yes, that is because and I did suffer from that compare and despair model that
What
you
a
just
great way of
spoke
putting
of.
it.
Um, but as I, the advice that I always give my students when I'm teaching is, you have to allow yourself to be a student. You have to allow yourself to have elementary work, beginner work, starting points. Not everything is going to be beautiful. And when you allow yourself that, great things can happen. But if you allow that compare and despair to enter into your mind, it really will stop you in your tracks.
Yeah, it erodes your confidence, I think, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. Yeah.
Because people tend to be quite, I don't know, reticent might be the word, about drawing anyway. So they think of sketchbooks as a drawing tool.
Yeah, I actually stopped calling mine sketchbooks and I started calling them project books because I found that I'm very critical about myself as a sketcher or a drawer. I don't look at myself as a good drawer. But, when I could call it a project book or a project gathering book, it changed it for me. It was just sort of a little mind game I played with myself.
Mm. I think it's a great thing to do actually, because certainly the two different types, the very finished looking ones and the ones that are, a work in progress because you're working towards something and they're happening immediately. They could almost do with naming as two completely different things because they are two completely different things.
Yes.
And they can be very off-putting to somebody that might naturally be quite happy to work in a sketchbook, but doesn't feel that they can produce something absolutely amazing and to some of the standards that we sometimes see online or in books.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
I'm not sure what the name should be. What was it that you called yours?
I call mine project
A
books,
project. Yeah.
if I have a particular project in mind, like one of my modules for this course, I believe it was the second module, I called it the Journey Project. And so that, the sketchbook was named the Journey Project.
Hmm.
And I just, yeah. And much of what I did in it never showed up on the completed piece of art at the end. But but it
Yeah.
was all part of the journey to get there.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I don't think that, again, that people just starting out on this journey always take on board that very often as artists, we produce a lot of ideas, but we can't possibly use them all because there simply isn't enough time, is there, in the year or the century to do that. So you generate a lot of ideas, but you simply don't have the time to use every single one of them. And sometimes things just don't work out.
Yes, that's right. And trash cans are okay, or you can cut it up and use it in collage or whatever, and that's okay.
Absolutely. I think I had one student at one point that said she made an awful lot of, uh, you know, grabs for pan handles, pot grabs out of
Mhm, mhm.
all sorts of things that she'd tried and hadn't worked out. But she said, I don't actually throw them in the bin. I just make
Yeah,
um,
recycle them, upcycle
absolutely.
them. Yes,
That,
absolutely.
yeah. So do you have a favourite module? Was the one in particular that stood out for you?
I think my favorite module, and it was hard because I actually loved every single module, and I got so much out of all of them. In fact, when you invited me to do this broadcast or this podcast, I'm thinking I'm going to go back and redo all this again because it was just such a fabulous learning opportunity. And it's been a few years now, and I'm thinking I'd be interested in seeing what what approach I would take second time around. But
Mhm.
my second, I think it was the second module was my favorite. And the reason I say that is I was really stuck and really intimidated by this particular one. And it really forced me to work through some of those barriers and blocks. And I think that just the act of problem solving as an artist it's what we do, isn't it? I mean, not if everything we touched, just came out perfect and beautiful every time, we'd be bored. So, it's the act of, coming up against these walls and having to work through them and problem solve. This particular one that was on Journey, if I have a picture, I think I sent you a picture of that one, two of the close-ups. I ended up doing a web of threads that I put stabilizer on, and then I put a paper map on it, sewed a paper map onto this webbing, and then along with some water soluble, and then I disintegrated the water soluble, which disintegrated much of the map. And I found that that's the first time I'd ever done anything with water soluble on a pre-made grid that incorporated paper. I
Mhm.
use water soluble a lot, but never in this way. And this created such a interesting foundation for some very structured pieces then that were applied to it. I made a bike that reminded me of Amsterdam. When you're in Amsterdam, it's all about bikes buzzing by you everywhere. So this was actually a piece that I made that had taken a Viking river trip that went from Amsterdam all the way through Germany and Austria, Hungary. I think we
Mhm.
ended up in Budapest. Anyways, it was just fascinating for me. It was the first time I had ever been overseas like that. And so this was a piece that was based on my memories of that trip.
Yes, because I noticed that you still got that same sort of remnants of paper on the background of the bicycle. There's
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, you sort of applied with water soluble and then torn away, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a great effect, isn't it? A very organic looking effect.
Yes, and surprisingly holds up pretty well as long as you care for it properly.
Mm. Do you have a favorite technique or favorite techniques in particular? Because I noticed you very much do alternate between hand and machine embroidery and a mixture of both. So I just
Yeah.
wonder if there was a technique that stood out in particular for you.
Well, I would say the technique that I use, I have 3 techniques that I use in almost all of my artwork that I find that I believe to be successful artwork. I do a lot of artwork, but the pieces that I really love and I feel are successful, I tend to use water-soluble fabric as a means of layering. It's definitely in my comfort zone. It allows me to build grounds because I do a lot of natural, landscape type things. So it allows me to build my ground up in layers. It adds depth. I can add snippets of vibrant colors and textures.
Mhm.
The other thing that I love to do is a combination of hand and machine stitch. I love the combination of both. And in most of my pieces, I will incorporate some hand stitch and some machine stitch.
Yes, because it actually also helps a little bit with the time involved, doesn't it? Because machine embroidery is a little bit quicker, and so you can then use that little bit faster background as a sort of backdrop for some hand embroidery.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you were saying before we have so many ideas and so little time. So the use of the machine definitely cuts some time. But I like the effects that my machine has, especially, I tend to utilize those specialty stitches that we all buy these machines for and never seem to use. Um, the triple stitch, for instance, is my go-to stitch. I use that all the time. It's just a straight stitch, but it's a triple stitch. I love that stitch. I use it in everything. And then some of those programmed stitches are fabulous for, running lines or couching over a thread or something. Some of
Mm.
those fancy stitches that they've got in there.
Do you have a favorite machine? One that you use all the time, or
I do, I do. My favorite is my Bernina. I have a Bernina 780, and I've had it since maybe 2015, and it is by far my favorite machine. I love my Janome as well, and my husband, who actually is a wonderful quilter, he has a Juki, which is a lightweight machine, and I get, that's my go-to when I need to take a class someplace and carry a machine with me. I'll take his.
so if you're going to drop it, it'll be his. I like your style.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Do you find that your machine's quite picky about the threads that it uses, or will it just take any?
My machine is not too picky as long as it's working properly. Right now, it's in the shop because it's not working properly. So hopefully, I'll get it back soon. But otherwise, I give it quite a workout, and it's very amicable with me. It also has what did they call that? It's like a felting foot or an embellishing foot,
Oh, yes.
like a needle punch foot, which I find really helpful with because, like, as I said, much of my artwork begins with the ground, and I will build up the ground with roving and, snippets of fabrics and silks and different things. So,
Mm.
and my Bernina has that attachment. So, for years, I didn't have an embellishing machine that was separate. Now I do. Actually, a friend of mine, rest her soul, just passed away, and I
Oh,
was
I'm
grant
sorry.
and I was granted her embellishing machine. So after, many years, I finally have a dedicated embellishing machine, but,
Mm.
you know
Yes, I actually have an embellishing machine that I don't use very often, but when I do use it, I'm always very impressed by it.
Mhm, mhm.
But I believe from friends that it's great to have the attachment, but you do have quite a lot of clearing out to do.
Yeah, yeah. You need to remember to keep your machine clean and happy.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I'm sure. I could judge just by the amount that falls through mine to the bottom of the machine, but of course it's sealed, it's not actually going anywhere, but there is a lot of clearing out to do on them. Do you and your husband, you said that your husband was a quilter. Do you ever collaborate on projects?
He likes the piecing aspect of quilting. He likes to paper piece and, he follows patterns and directions. He tends to collaborate with me on the color choices, and I do his machine quilting.
Mm.
Um, he started this during COVID when we were in lockdown and had little to do, and he needed something to do. So he said, always thought that I had a quilt in me. And so he started quilting, and he's made several now. He's actually quite good. He's a better piecer than I am, but that's not where I put my energy these days.
Mm.
So,
So did you teach him, or did he well, I suppose if it was during COVID, he couldn't easily go to a class. Was it you that
yeah,
showed him?
no, I taught him.
Mm.
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah, yeah.
fantastic. No arguments or
No,
disagreements?
no, no. The only argument we have is over space.
Oh.
We're both in a small studio space right now.
Oh, so you have to share.
We have to share.
Because if you're doing large quilts, it takes quite a lot of space, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. Yes,
Mm. But you're kind with him. You let him have his half.
absolutely. Yeah, he's kind with me too, so he's always supported me.
Oh, that's great. So, just sort of returning back to the Master Practitioner course, I wonder how you felt about the experience of sort of creating your own design briefs from the prompts and the modules. Did you find that helpful, and is it something you still continue with?
Well, that's a very good question. The design briefs did not come easily for me. And I say that because I'm a very intuitive artist. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants most of the time. So I needed to pare down my expectations of myself, and I needed to realize that my design brief was not going to look like, a design brief from a corporate designer, you know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
Um, so my design briefs, were in pencil or ink, a ballpoint pen, in my project book, and were hand drawn. But I will say this, that although it was a challenge for me, I did find that having the forethought of a design brief was very helpful in keeping my mind on track. As I said, I tend to be quite intuitive, and I simply must allow junctures where my best laid plans get overridden by the inspiration of the moment when I'm in that zone of art making. But having that design brief to refer to kind of keep me on track was very helpful, and I have kept up that practice. Yes.
Yes, I think it's having a design brief I suppose you could view it as either being limiting or being quite helpful, because it does tell you, well, what the piece is going to be used for, what space is available for it, what colours it might need to be. So some of the things that suddenly, from having a very wide choice, you can start narrow that choice of what you're going to make downwards, can't you?
Absolutely. And some of the non-negotiables, say, for instance, if you're doing some sort of a collaboration with somebody wants to buy a piece of your work, and they have a particular, area or in mind for it, or shape, general shape in mind for it, or color scheme. It's very important for that type of thing. I don't do a lot of commissions because I find them too constraining, but I have done some, and the design brief definitely comes in handy with that. But I find it, even with my more intuitive art, to be helpful to, as I said, keep me moving towards something, although I do allow myself to veer from it when I find a better approach.
Yes, someone described it to me the other day, very well, I think, that you can sort of go from, on a road trip, let's say from New York to Boston, you might want to veer off to do some sightseeing along the way, but at least if you know where you're going, then you know when you've arrived there. I think
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
a bit of an analogy.
that's a very good analogy, yeah.
Yeah, it does seem to work. So I know that you've obviously done quite a bit of exhibiting. Could you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Most recently, my exhibiting, since I've moved here to Florida, has taken on a completely different look or approach. Down here in Central Florida, I'm a member of a textile art group, so we do exhibit once a year. We have a show together that's quite well attended. A lot of publicity goes out for that. Also, we have some art galleries that are quite embracing of the fiber arts and textile arts that I tend to show in local galleries, or galleries around the state. Prior to me moving down here, when I was still in New York, I did a fair amount of entering into different shows and exhibitions. Uh, and I, of course, had a lot of rejections, but was accepted into some, and I, did win some awards. So that was a very good experience. But I just decided it's very, very laborsome and
Mhm.
financially and time consuming to enter a lot of different shows. I mean, there's the costs of, the entry fees, there's the photography that you have to have done, in my case, I wanted professional photography done. So there's a lot of cost involved as well as the time and, your ego when you're when, when you're rejected or, when you, uh, but I just decided when I moved down here that I was going to place my focus, on other avenues of sharing my art. So now I have a sale 1 to 2 times a year. My art is getting out there. I've got a bit of clientele that, come year after year and buy my art from me. So I'm feeling like my art is getting out there into the world a little bit, and I exhibit it some, not as much as I'd like. My goals for this year is actually to get more of an online presence. I have a bit of a challenge that because I live here most of the year, but I spend summers in New York. We still have some acreage up there that we do some glamping, kind of,
Yeah.
it's camping, but, a little bit more glitzy than that.
Mm.
Um, so that prevents me from being able to completely put my roots here to where I can agree to do all kinds of workshops and presentations, that kind of thing all year long. But I do try to do a few in a year.
Yeah. And how do you find splitting your time in that way? Do you plan to take work with you? Do you just not work when you're in New York? Because it's difficult, isn't it, trying to uproot your entire studio, your machine and everything?
Right. I could never not work ever because being a practicing artist is part of who I am. So I always take work with me. I try to plan what my focus will be for the summer. One of the things that I do tend to do is paint more when I'm in New York because it requires less materials, and that is something I also love to do. I paint with acrylics and watercolor as well.
Mm.
And I try to do some more writing when I'm up there. I'm also a poet who
Lady of many talents. I can certainly see how the painting would feed through very immediately into your textiles, but do you think the poetry does as well?
absolutely. Most recently, and this is something since I've taken the class with School of Stitched Textiles, the first module was actually I based my piece on a poem by May Sarton. And most recently, I've been allowing my own poetry to inspire my works of art. Or it may be a work of art inspires a poem, but I'm pairing them now. So I will show a work of art, and next to it will be the poem framed.
Yes, what wonderful thing to do. There's just the authenticity is really there, isn't it? It's something that is very much a part of you being shared with other people.
Yes, yes. That's really my truest, most authentic voice, I think, is when I'm pairing my visual art with my poetry.
Do you do you have any advice for students that might want to do some exhibiting but are frightened of getting a rejection? Because it happens to everybody.
Yes, it
Um,
does. Yeah.
not every gallery is. I think sometimes it's finding out the right galleries or the right settings for you and your art. And obviously, if you go to the wrong one, you can sometimes get a rejection, which can be quite upsetting, can't it?
You get used to it. You do develop a thick skin, but it gets very exciting when you're accepted into a, really credible show. I've been in the fiber arts field for probably close to 25 or 30 years now, and well, 25 years. And it has exploded in the world in the
Yeah.
sense that 25 years ago, when I first began exhibiting my art, it was easy to get into shows. Pretty much if you entered, you got in because, we were we were few. There wasn't a
Mm.
lot of us. But now, because fiber art has taken on recognition from the mainstream art world as true art, not just a craft, it has exploded. So it is more difficult to get into these shows. There's no doubt about it. I would say just keep on trying, and set yourself a goal of entering 2 or 3 shows a year and, putting your best foot forward for it.
Yes, and do you do a fair bit of research, or did you do a fair bit of research before you put your work forward to a particular gallery? So that you knew that it was somewhere that may be more likely to accept textile art.
Yes. At that time, I've since let my membership lapse because I'm doing less art quilts, but at that time, I was doing a lot of art quilting. Now I'm doing more embroidery-based stuff, but I was a member of SAQA, and they had a really good website that had different shows that were, textile-related shows that were coming up. So that's a very good resource.
No, that's a very good tip. Thank you. I know that you're a member of a group now,
Mhm.
and that you obviously enjoy meeting with them. Are they all like-minded people? Do you exhibit together? How does the sort of setup for that work?
Well, yeah, since my retirement, my focus has been to facilitate and mentor this group of women. There's about 25 of us at present, and we're all at different stages in our art practice. I would say at least a third of our group are real beginners. They have a deep desire to create textile art of various forms, but they're at the beginning of their journey. And then I would say 2/3, maybe another quarter are maybe halfway there if I would, like well into their journey, doing great work. And then there's, several of us that, are really been doing this for a long time. So we have a very, I wanna say, eclectic and group of women that have various stages of experience,
Yeah.
and we all mentor each other. I try to mentor those beginners because, again, that compare and despair, they're looking at some of the stuff that some of us who have been doing this for 30 years are doing, and, they can feel like, "Oh my," but most of us come from a place of real humility where we look at beginner work and say, "This fabulous. There's so much potential there. Just keep on creating. Just keep on keeping on, and you're gonna be, putting out some amazing stuff." We meet twice a month. We do some teaching. We do a lot of sharing of techniques and ideas. We do show and tell, of course, and we just basically share our experience and joy of, all things textile. Some of us are art quilters, some of us are embroiderers, hand stitchers. We have felt makers, people who are knitters, like real high-end knitters, like where they design their own patterns and they're real artsy. We have people who make felted sculptures or stitch sculptures, just a huge variety of talent in that group, and
Mm.
it's definitely my joy and my
It's
lifeline right now.
it's wonderful that you are so generous with your time and with your experience, because I think that, particularly for people that are just starting out, it's invaluable to have somebody that will give suggestions, give advice, not judge, but just try to help them along on the right path.
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
think sometimes textile artists can be a little bit precious, a little bit protective about some of their techniques and their methods. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's great that you're obviously not doing that. You are in there sharing with them and helping them.
Well, I had some women that were amazing mentors in my life, and without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. So, there's part of me that just wants to give back because it was given to me.
Hmm. No, that's fantastic. I wish we had more groups like that here. I know that you also run a long arm quilting business, don't you? In your,
Yeah.
I should say, in your spare time, but it doesn't sound as though you have too much.
Yeah, I've actually had a long arm quilting business since, oh goodness, I think 25 years. I think I opened it in 2000 and earns me my mad money, to finance my indulgences in the textile art field.
Mhm. And is that something your husband helps out with as well? Because it sounds as though it would be up his, right up his street.
Oh, well, that is the plan. We're, hoping that as we get more business in the computerized quilting field, that he'll take on that part of it. I have built up a business, a clientele of people who like my custom work, which, I do, all freehand. So I'm actually trying to build up a business of people who just want, a computerized pentagram so that hopefully my husband can do some of it too.
Keep him
But
busy.
keep him busy in retirement as well, you betcha.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. They find mischief if you don't keep them busy. Um, I wonder if you have any advice for some of our current students, be they master practitioners or be they just starting out on City and Guilds courses, um, about where they might find inspiration if they're struggling with it.
I may be reiterating some of what I said earlier, but firstly, I would say that a student's worst enemy is not allowing themselves to fail. We simply must allow ourselves that privilege. Otherwise, inspiration seems to just get squashed when our outcomes don't meet our expectations.
Mm.
So I would say embrace that mistake and look at it as an intuitive act and see where it brings you. And, I mean, the worst that can happen is you throw it in the rubbish and start again. But I find that inspiration tends to just be squashed when your expectations are too high. I think the expectation should be to to just learn and to explore and see where it brings you rather than a particular outcome sometimes.
Mhm.
The other thing is that inspiration is all around us, and if you're using a project book, a sketchbook, you can write, you can listen, you can paint, you can stitch, and do it all from intuition, and that will nail your ideas to that paper, and then you can go from there. Again, a jumping off point. I was in my group the other day with some of probably 20 of us there last week, and I did a little project with them about intuitive color. And I just started everybody off with an assigned color, which they didn't have a choice in. And that sometimes that in itself, when you have a limitation, can be inspiring because your mind's not allowed to go everywhere. It has to
Yes.
be within that limitation.
Yeah.
So I assigned everybody a color and I started them out with a painted concertina book and we did a mind map on that color. I actually did a guided meditation talking about the color and had them thinking about color as metaphor. And the end projects ended up being simply wonderful. And and I told them this isn't about an end product of beauty. This is about an exploration in color. I don't even want you to think about, making something beautiful or a piece of art. Just think about that color you've been assigned and what does it mean to you and what does it represent. And we used all kinds of fabrics and stitching and beads and all kinds of mixed media collage to, to make that project. So that's how, if somebody has a block in inspiration, that's what I would say. Put on some
Mhm.
limitations and just start, using your intuition within that limitation and go for it.
Yes, because taking some of the expectations out is really helpful, isn't it? I think we all sit down hoping that we're going to sew something wonderful, but that's not a realistic prospect, really. We're often not going to.
That's right.
Um, but in that process, if we make mistakes or let's say we deviate from the path, perhaps, that we'd originally thought we'd be on, we still learned something. I think you always learn more from your mistakes actually than you do from your successes.
I agree. I agree.
Yes, it's great to aim for perfect, but realistically, that's not going to happen. And why would we want it to really?
Right.
Art really isn't about being perfect, is it?
That's right. It's not. It's definitely not about being perfect.
No, I think more and more recently, I'm seeing so much data that's saying I think at least 50% of people come to art or come to textiles and crafts because they have experienced some type of mental health problem, be that stress, be it, it might be that they've suffered a loss, that they're having problems with their own health, all kinds of things. So if when they come in, they immediately feel pressure to produce something amazing, it's not going to be very stress relieving, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I also think that a reason that women and men, it's not just a women's thing, although we do tend to dominate the textile art field. There are
Mm.
many men as well.
Just taking a little skip back, I know that you talked about your husband taking up quilting during COVID.
Yes.
Um, you've been a textile artist for a long period of time. What differences did you see come in during that time when it was such an extraordinary time for the world, wasn't it? We were all
Yes, it was. Yeah.
sort of isolated to a greater or lesser degree,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure some things have actually ever gone back, have they? I just wondered what your experiences of it were.
Well, I was working as a nurse all
Oh my
throughout
goodness.
COVID, and
Mm.
that never changed for me. I saw patients every day through COVID, and I worked in the field of hospice, which is end of life care. So it was a particularly stressful time for me. And, to not have the outlets, like everything was closed around here. There were no, I mean, we had no, there were no more game nights and music nights, and the pools were closed, and so much. The golf courses, even for a time, the golf courses were
Mhm.
closed, and then they opened back up, thank goodness. But for me, the biggest change during COVID for me was the amount of online resources that popped up. And we got, as a fiber art field, or as an art field in general, got really good at online courses,
Yeah.
really good. And as you said, we've never gone back. Less and less people want to do face-to-face courses now. More and more
Mm.
people want to do online because it works with your schedule, and because of the technology, you know, it's
Yes.
it's wonderful now. And I don't think without that reset that good or bad, because there is a part of me that misses the face-to-face courses too that we used to do so much more of. But the online experience, you can basically take courses from all over the world and meet people from all over the world, and that's a normal thing now. And I don't think
Mm.
it was before, not to this degree.
No. And, well, I think actually many of us had never used things like Zoom, had we? Or that some of the online conference tools that enabled us to maybe watch somebody machine embroidering or to join in with an online course in that way just wasn't there.
No, it wasn't, and it's now a natural part of most of our lives.
It is. The other thing I think that it's has made a bit of a difference with is the way that we actually see textile art because previous to that, you would go along to an exhibition, you would physically be present at the exhibition. Whereas I think during COVID, so many of the exhibitions moved online, didn't they? I
Oh,
don't know if that was your experience.
yes, yes. Hmm.
And it's not quite the same, is it? You for just for something as basic as even getting an idea of the size of a piece, you don't really know by looking at something how big it is.
Yeah, yes, you're right. There's definitely pros and cons to that. I mean, I think that we have a much more of a we're at I don't know if it's a saturation point, but we have more availability to view fiber art than ever before. It's everywhere. But pictures are wonderful, but definitely can't do a piece of fiber art justice because when you're in the same room, it's tactile.
Yes.
It's tactile. It draws you in. My pieces tend to be very intimate and on the small end, so a picture actually, can be a pro for me because,
Hmm.
it generates that close up. It already draws you in. You're already on a computer or something. You're looking closely at it. And whereas if I'm in a gallery, you have to really step up to my pieces because most of my pieces tend to be, I don't know, maybe 18 inches, or smaller, 20 inches maybe, 20 by 20 or 18 by 18 or even 12 by 12. I tend to make smaller pieces.
What is it that comes next for you, Lorraine? Have you got other things on the go at the moment, plans that you're working toward?
Yes, I actually am developing a website. I had a website years ago and kind of let it go, but I'm developing another website with a different focus in mind. I'd like to do some of these online workshops. I'd like to also sell some of my art online, have a gallery.
Hmm. And are you able to do the website yourself, or is that something you would have to ask someone else to do?
Well, right now I'm trying to do it through Canva and see where that takes me. I feel like I have enough ability to do, I mean, especially with today's tools, to do a simple website. But I think if, once I get my online courses ready to launch, I may need to get some people in there to help me have the
Mm,
best experience with that. So
yeah.
I'm in kind of in the beginning phases of that. Right now, I do a lot of face-to-face teaching and presentations, things like that around the community that I live in,
Hmm.
both here as well as in New York.
And so lots still to do, really.
Of
Haven't you? You've got
course,
lots still
yeah.
to do.
Yeah. The challenge is always not getting so busy with this, with the marketing your stuff that you're not making it.
Yes.
For me, that's always, always the challenge because my work is pretty labor intensive because I do use a fair amount of hand stitching and everything I do, and it's multiple processes. So I may only make, 6 or 10 pieces a year, which, I'm
Mhm.
never gonna make a living off of, let's put it that way, but
Mm.
it's my love and it's my passion.
And how do you feel if someone purchases one? I mean, do you how do you feel about letting it go? Because it's you spend so much time on it, don't you?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Well, I have sold a lot of my favorite pieces. My favorite pieces are the ones that tend to sell quickly. I just sold a piece based on the Dingle Peninsula. It's called Hues of the Dingle Peninsula, and I think I sent a picture of that to you. It's one of my most recent pieces. And
Mhm.
I was in Ireland last September and just was so inspired by the landscape and the sky and the lighting. So I worked very hard on capturing that in this piece, the hues of the grass and the stone walls, sky and the ocean. And I really loved it. And it sold like immediately for a very good price. I'm not complaining, but there was a part of me that was like, oh, I'm letting my baby go. I wasn't
Yeah.
quite ready. Um, so I do feel that at times, and other times I feel like, okay, I've enjoyed this on my, I've enjoyed this long enough, and I'm happy it's going to make room
Mm,
for more art, because
mm.
you just don't have endless amounts of space, do we? So,
No, I think we'd need to buy a new house, wouldn't we, to house it all?
and then of course there are some pieces that I will never sell because they're too personal, and
Yeah.
I and they are sort of a memorial of a time in my life.
Yeah, that's as it should be. I
Yeah.
think, it's you wouldn't want to get rid of everything, would you?
No.
Not everything's for sale. No. Lorraine, thank you so much for what has been an absolutely fantastic chat. It's been just lovely to catch up with you and to hear more about what you're doing and what you're planning for the future.
Yes, yeah. My big focus this year is going to be on stump work. I want to get better at stump work. So
Mm,
yeah, I do a fair amount of it, but I haven't gotten to an expert level on it yet, and that's where
mm,
I'm headed.
yeah. Fantastic. So
Yeah.
an awful lot that you've got planned for the next few months.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Gail. This has
Ah,
been a wonderful time.